In the quiet, familiar towns of Alabama, a horrific story unfolded that shook not only the local community but the entire country. At the center of it all was a 16-year-old teenager named Ethan Williams, whose heart was filled with hatred and racist views. His victims were vulnerable black women whom he found online and then brutally murdered. This series of crimes became a nightmare for residents and sparked widespread discussions about racism, violence, and safety. Today, we will share the details of this shocking case, which exposed the dark side of human nature and raised important questions for society. The teenager at the center of this dark and disturbing story, Ethan Williams, presented himself to the world as an ordinary young man, blending seamlessly with his peers and the community around him. His appearance was unremarkable, with features that did not draw undue attention, allowing him to slip unnoticed through hallways, streets, and digital spaces alike. To an outsider, he might have seemed like any other adolescent navigating the complexities of growing up. A boy attending school, interacting with friends, and living a seemingly typical life. Yet beneath this unassuming exterior lurked a turbulent and dangerous inner world, a mind deeply entangled in hatred, prejudice, and violent intentions that would soon have catastrophic consequences. Born and raised in Alabama, a region burdened by a long and complex history of racial tension and division, Ethan's environment played a pivotal role in shaping his worldview. From his earliest memories, he was surrounded by social and cultural undercurrents that perpetuated aggressive and intolerant beliefs. These influences, whether subtle or overt, seeped into his consciousness, cultivating a mindset that grew like a cancer within his psyche. His family, community, and the broader cultural atmosphere all contributed significantly to the formation of his twisted ideology. Through explicit teachings, implicit cues, and repeated exposure to biased narratives, Ethan absorbed a toxic mixture of racism and hostility that came to define his understanding of the world. These beliefs were not isolated or momentary, they were reinforced daily. Conversations at home, attitudes of peers, portrayals in media, and social interactions all worked to normalize exclusion and prejudice against those perceived as different. The environment he inhabited offered few, if any, opportunities to question or challenge these destructive ideas. Instead, they became deeply ingrained, shaping not only how he perceived others, but, perhaps even more dangerously, how he saw himself in relation to the world. This worldview hardened his heart and clouded his mind, creating barriers that blocked empathy, understanding, and compassion. As he entered adolescence, Ethan's search for identity and belonging intensified, leading him deeper into circles that would validate and amplify his hateful beliefs. The internet became his primary hunting ground, not just for potential victims, but for connection, affirmation, and a sense of belonging within communities that shared and celebrated his destructive worldview. Online forums, chat rooms, and social media platforms provided him with spaces where his toxic ideologies were not only accepted, but encouraged, echoing his hatred back to him with increasing intensity. These virtual echo chambers served as accelerants to his growing rage, feeding his desire to act out violently against those he despised. Within this digital realm, Ethan's focus sharpened, his hatred crystallizing most intensely around black women, whom he irrationally viewed as the embodiment of everything he loathed. His selection of victims was no accident. It was the result of a deeply ingrained and warped logic that framed these women as enemies deserving of punishment. This distorted perception transformed Ethan from a passive consumer of hateful content into an active predator, intent on inflicting harm and asserting dominance through brutal acts of violence. The virtual spaces where he nurtured his hatred became the blueprint for his real-world actions. The grooming of this dangerous mindset was gradual but relentless. Every piece of hateful propaganda he consumed, every hateful message he exchanged further blurred the lines between right and wrong in his mind. Violence, in his warped reality, was no longer just justified, it was necessary. His online interactions did more than fuel his fantasies. They gave tangible form to a violent ideology that thrived in the anonymity and distance the internet provided. The vast reach and lack of accountability inherent in digital spaces allowed his darkest impulses to grow unchecked, away from immediate scrutiny or consequence. Outside of the shadowy digital world, Ethan maintained the appearance of a normal adolescent. He navigated school, family life, and social settings with a practiced detachment, carefully hiding the storm raging beneath the surface. This dual existence was precarious and fragile. The stark contradiction between his inner darkness and outward normalcy created a pressure cooker of conflicting emotions and escalating tension. Isolated by his beliefs and driven by a desperate need for control and purpose, he spiraled down a dangerous path, increasingly disconnected from empathy, human connection, and the very values that bind communities together. What made this case particularly alarming was the way early environmental influences, combined with unmonitored access to extremist online communities, catalyzed a young mind into violent action. Ethan's development was marked by missed opportunities for intervention, support, or redirection. The warning signs were present, but they went unheeded by those who might have intervened. His story illustrates the profound consequences that can arise when hatred is allowed to fester unchecked, especially in an era where digital spaces can simultaneously conceal and nurture destructive ideologies. This young man's descent into violence serves as a grim reminder of the vulnerability of impressionable minds to radicalization, particularly when they grow up in environments where prejudice and intolerance are normalized. It exposes the urgent need for vigilance, education, and community support aimed at identifying and counteracting the early signs of extremist beliefs before they metastasize into real-world harm. Understanding how someone so seemingly ordinary could harbor such dangerous thoughts is essential to preventing future tragedies fueled by hatred and violence. Ultimately, Ethan's story is a tragic testament to the power of ideology to corrupt, distort, and destroy a life. It underscores the urgent necessity for education, empathy, and community intervention aimed at breaking the cycle of hatred before it culminates in irreversible harm. Only through confronting and dismantling these toxic beliefs can society hope to prevent future tragedies, creating a world in which every individual is seen, valued, and respected beyond the confines of prejudice and fear. His journey calls on families, educators, policymakers, and community leaders to foster environments where young people feel understood, supported, and guided toward empathy and inclusion. The battle against hate is ongoing and complex, but by addressing the early seeds of radicalization, society can help ensure that no other child follows a path as dark and destructive as his. The lessons gleaned from Ethan's descent provide vital insights into the importance of nurturing compassion, critical thinking, and resilience in the next generation. Tools essential for building a safer, more just, and equitable world for all. Racist beliefs and prejudice formed the very foundation of Ethan's worldview, shaping not only his thoughts and perceptions, but ultimately driving him to commit devastating and violent acts. From a young age, he was steeped in a toxic ideology, one that convinced him that one race was inherently superior to another. This dangerous conviction became more than just a belief. It transformed into a justification for hatred, violence, and cruelty. This worldview was not the result of isolated incidents or mere misunderstandings. Rather, it was the culmination of deeply ingrained stereotypes, unchecked envy, and a profound ignorance that permeated every aspect of his environment and psyche. Together, these elements fused to create a simmering anger within him, an emotional pressure cooker that demanded release through acts of aggression and harm against those he despised. To Ethan, black women were no longer simply individuals. They had become symbolic adversaries, tangible embodiments of the fears, frustrations, and insecurities he was unable or unwilling to confront within himself. This dehumanization enabled him to project his internal conflicts onto these women, externalizing his pain, rage, and vulnerability in the most destructive ways possible. Instead of grappling with his own weaknesses, Ethan found scapegoats, targets onto which he could channel his destructive impulses and justify his hatred. This was not casual prejudice or fleeting resentment. It was a relentless and consuming fixation that invaded every corner of his thoughts, distorting his entire perception of reality. His hatred went far beyond mere words or passing thoughts. It manifested in deliberate, violent actions aimed at asserting control, power, and dominance over those he considered inferior. In his mind, violence became a perverse form of empowerment, a means of imposing order on a life otherwise defined by feelings of powerlessness, fear, and inadequacy. Each brutal act was, in his warped perspective, a statement of strength, a desperate attempt to reclaim a sense of self-worth that had long eluded him. These outbursts were far from impulsive. They were calculated expressions of a deeper psychological turmoil, rooted in hatred and sustained by a toxic ideological framework. The stereotypes fueling this dangerous worldview were simplistic, yet devastatingly effective in providing false justifications for his actions. He internalized narratives that portrayed black women as inferior, threatening, or deserving of punishment. These damaging misconceptions were not developed in isolation, but were perpetuated and reinforced by the social and cultural milieu surrounding him. His family attitudes, peer group influences, the media he consumed, and the online communities he engaged with all echoed and amplified this racist rhetoric. This environment normalized his biases, making hatred seem not only acceptable but necessary, creating an echo chamber where dangerous ideas thrived unchecked and unchallenged. Envy was another powerful force shaping his mindset. Ethan perceived the identities, experiences, and freedoms of others, particularly those he targeted, as privileges that he was denied or unable to access. This jealousy deepened his resentment, fueling a vicious cycle of bitterness and hostility. Rather than seeking understanding, connection, or healing, he allowed these feelings to harden into animosity, turning empathy and compassion into foreign and inaccessible concepts. His emotional isolation became complete, further entrenching his resolve to inflict harm on those he blamed for his own pain and misfortune. Ignorance, both willful and deeply embedded, blinded him to the humanity and individuality of his victims. He failed to see them as people, complex beings with hopes, dreams, fears, and struggles. Instead, he reduced them to mere symbols within his fractured belief system. This dehumanization made it easier for him to carry out unspeakable acts without remorse or hesitation. His lack of education and understanding regarding race, history, and social justice left him vulnerable to manipulation by hateful ideologies that promised simplistic answers to complex emotional problems. Violence, in his distorted view, was a tool for self-assertion, a misguided way to overcome his own feelings of inadequacy and powerlessness by inflicting pain on others. Each violent act was a temporary victory over his inner demons, a desperate effort to silence the doubts, fears, and insecurities that plagued him daily. Yet rather than providing relief or healing, this path only deepened his wounds and entrenched him further in a cycle of escalating violence and brutality. The journey of Ethan Williams is a powerful illustration of how destructive ideologies can warp the minds of vulnerable individuals, transforming their internal struggles into outward aggression. It highlights the profound dangers of allowing prejudice, hatred, and ignorance to fester unchecked, especially in the absence of guidance, support, and education. His actions stand as a stark warning of the catastrophic consequences that can arise when society fails to address the root causes of hatred and neglects to equip young people with the tools they need to understand, cope with, and overcome their fears. Ultimately, the story of Ethan Williams is a tragic testament to the power of ideology to corrupt, distort, and destroy a life. It underscores the urgent necessity for education, empathy, and community intervention aimed at breaking the cycle of hatred before it culminates in irreversible harm. Only through confronting and dismantling these toxic beliefs can society hope to prevent future tragedies, creating a world in which every individual is seen, valued, and respected beyond the confines of prejudice and fear. This cautionary tale implores communities, families, educators, and policymakers to act decisively to provide vulnerable youth with positive role models, comprehensive education on diversity and inclusion, and robust mental health support. It challenges us all to reject the narratives of division and hate, fostering instead cultures of understanding, compassion, and mutual respect. The lessons drawn from Ethan's descent into violence serve as a reminder that hatred is not innate, but learned, and therefore it can be unlearned. By addressing these issues head-on, society can work toward healing the fractures that allow such ideologies to take root and flourish. It can cultivate environments where young minds grow strong, empathetic, and resilient, armed not with prejudice, but with the knowledge and kindness necessary to build a more just and equitable future. In doing so, we honor the memory of those harmed by hatred and take meaningful steps to ensure that no other child is led down such a dark and destructive path. The teenager's rampage was not born from spur-of-the-moment impulses or reckless mistakes, but emerged as the result of cold, meticulous planning and chilling calculation. Each attack was carefully orchestrated, conceived long before he ever stepped into the shadows to execute his violent intent. He fully immersed himself in the digital realm, weaponizing social media platforms and specialized websites as tools for his hunt. These virtual spaces became his surveillance grounds, where he observed potential victims with patient precision, studying their daily routines, mapping their habitual movements, and gathering detailed information about their lifestyles. His focus was razor sharp. He sought out those who appeared isolated, whose patterns revealed vulnerability, and who, in his warped perspective, presented the easiest targets to strike. His selection process was cruel and methodical. Ethan identified women who lived alone, often those without close family or community ties, which made them more susceptible to being caught off guard and less likely to have immediate support. He also targeted individuals who maintained minimal social contact, people who might not be promptly missed or whose disappearance might not trigger swift investigation. This calculated choice of victims revealed a cold and strategic mind, intent on minimizing his own risk while maximizing opportunities to inflict harm. His approach reflected a disturbing blend of predatory instinct sharpened by a deep-seated hatred and ideological conviction. When it came to carrying out his assaults, Ethan's tactics were defined by suddenness and brutal efficiency. Preferring the cover of darkness, he chose his locations with care: dimly lit alleys, secluded parks, quiet residential streets near his victims' homes. These settings provided the concealment and control necessary for him to lie in wait, observe patiently, and strike without warning. The attacks were swift and merciless, leaving victims with barely a moment to react or escape. His use of physical violence was often extreme and terrifying, leaving a trail of trauma and destruction that echoed throughout the community. The impact on the victims was devastating and multifaceted. Some survived the attacks, but carried with them the heavy burden of deep psychological scars, wounds that penetrated far beyond the physical, altering their lives profoundly and often irreversibly. These survivors bore witness to horrors that many cannot comprehend, facing lasting battles with anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress. For others, the assaults were fatal, prematurely ending lives that held promise and potential. Each case added a new layer of sorrow and fear to the community's collective consciousness, amplifying the urgency felt by law enforcement and residents alike. Law enforcement agencies responded by meticulously recording and analyzing the growing number of victims and incidents. A chilling pattern emerged amid the seemingly disparate attacks. Despite variations in location or precise circumstances, all victims shared one tragic commonality: they were Black women. This shared trait, combined with the consistent modus operandi, led investigators to conclude they were dealing with a serial predator motivated by racist ideologies. The racial dimension of these crimes added a harrowing layer to the investigation, underscoring not only the physical brutality but the deep-rooted hatred that fueled the violence. As the investigation progressed, the pattern of attacks revealed Ethan's increasing boldness and confidence. Over time, his actions grew more audacious, and the intervals between assaults shortened. This escalation intensified the community's fear and desperation. No one felt safe, especially Black women living alone or in vulnerable circumstances. The pervasive atmosphere of terror extended far beyond the immediate victims, casting a long, dark shadow over neighborhoods and straining the fabric of community relationships. Ethan's adeptness at navigating digital platforms with calculated precision further complicated efforts to track and apprehend him. His knowledge of technology allowed him to cover his tracks effectively, evade detection, and communicate within online circles that reinforced his beliefs and provided him with a sense of belonging and validation. This digital sophistication masked the real and present threat he posed, enabling him to prolong his reign of terror far longer than might otherwise have been possible. The stories of the victims, once uncovered, painted a vivid and painful picture of survival, resilience, and profound suffering. Those who lived through the attacks bore witness not only to the physical violence inflicted upon them, but also to the deep psychological torment that followed. Many wrestled with post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression, their lives forever altered by moments of unthinkable terror. Their courage in coming forward and sharing their experiences helped authorities piece together the puzzle, bringing attention to an ongoing and urgent threat within the community. This harrowing chapter in Alabama's recent history underscored the vital necessity for vigilance, support, and systemic change. It illuminated the myriad ways in which prejudice and hatred can manifest in violence and highlighted the critical importance of protecting vulnerable populations. The case served as a somber reminder that behind every statistic is a human story, a life affected, a family shattered, and a community in mourning. Ultimately, Ethan's calculated campaign of terror left a scar not only on his victims, but on the very fabric of the society that failed to detect and stop him sooner. It exposed critical gaps in community awareness, law enforcement responsiveness, and social support systems. This tragic sequence of events became a catalyst for renewed efforts to address the root causes of such violence, advocate for marginalized communities, and build a safer, more just society for all. After a disturbing series of violent attacks swept through parts of Alabama, the state's law enforcement agencies galvanized into action, launching an intensive and coordinated investigation aimed at bringing the perpetrator to justice. The gravity of the situation was undeniable, with the community reeling from the escalating number of victims and the brazen nature of the assaults. Recognizing the urgent need to halt the violence and restore a sense of security, multiple agencies pooled their resources and expertise, forming task forces dedicated solely to unraveling the mystery behind these horrific crimes. The investigative process was methodical and painstaking. Detectives meticulously collected and analyzed every piece of evidence available, treating each clue as a critical piece of a larger puzzle. Witness statements became invaluable, as individuals from various neighborhoods came forward to share observations that, when pieced together, began to form a clearer picture of the assailants' movements and methods. The accounts varied. Some described fleeting glimpses of a figure lurking in shadows. Others recalled unsettling encounters that, at the time, seemed isolated, but were now understood as parts of a broader pattern. These testimonies not only helped define the timeline and locations of the attacks, but also revealed behavioral consistencies that hinted at Ethan's profile. Complementing human testimony, technological resources played a pivotal role in advancing the investigation. Surveillance footage from security cameras in public spaces near victims' residences and along known routes captured fleeting images of a suspicious young man whose presence matched the descriptions given by witnesses. The grainy yet telling visuals allowed law enforcement to trace patterns and identify potential suspects with greater precision. However, the breakthrough came through the analysis of digital footprints, the modern trail that often betrays even the most careful criminals. Forensic cyber investigators delved deep into Ethan's online activities, examining his correspondence, social media interactions, and search history. The data revealed a chilling narrative: extensive searches related to potential victims, violent ideologies, and discussions in online communities that nurtured and reinforced his extremist beliefs. Chat logs and messages further exposed his mindset, intentions, and, crucially, connections to the crimes being investigated. This digital evidence was instrumental in establishing not only his identity, but also the premeditated nature of his actions, providing law enforcement with the tangible proof needed to secure an arrest warrant. Ethan's arrest sent shockwaves through the local community and beyond. Many found it almost unfathomable that someone so young could perpetrate such brutal and calculated violence. The revelation shattered any illusions that these crimes were the acts of a hardened adult or a stranger unknown to the victims. Instead, it exposed the unsettling reality that a child, indoctrinated by hatred and alienation, had turned into a merciless predator. This contrast between youth and savagery fueled widespread public outrage, intensifying calls for justice and systemic change. Following the arrest, authorities conducted comprehensive searches of Ethan's home and digital devices. Law enforcement teams combed through his belongings, uncovering additional evidence that solidified the case against him. Items such as weapons, documents, and digital storage media were seized, examined for links to the attacks, and meticulously cataloged. The volume and consistency of the collected evidence laid a robust foundation for the charges that would follow, charges covering a string of violent offenses that had terrorized an entire community. The public response to these developments was immediate and passionate. Victims' families sought closure and justice, their voices amplified in media coverage and public forums. Community leaders and activists, including Angela Johnson, a local civil rights advocate, and Marcus Taylor, a prominent community organizer, leveraged the case to highlight deeper issues, including racial violence, youth radicalization, and gaps in mental health support and law enforcement preparedness. The teenagers' actions and subsequent arrest became a symbol of the urgent need for preventive measures, educational outreach, and more effective intervention strategies aimed at at-risk youth. Simultaneously, the judicial process began to unfold, with prosecutors preparing to present a comprehensive case against Ethan. The complexity of the situation, a minor accused of heinous crimes, introduced challenging legal and ethical considerations. The court had to navigate the delicate balance between holding Ethan accountable and recognizing his age, psychological state, and potential for rehabilitation. This intricate legal landscape drew attention from experts in juvenile justice, mental health professionals, and human rights advocates, sparking debate over appropriate sentencing and the role of the justice system in such cases. Throughout the investigation and subsequent proceedings, the case highlighted the evolving challenges faced by law enforcement in the digital age. The ability to track and interpret online behavior proved vital, demonstrating how technology can serve as both a tool for criminals and a means of their capture. It underscored the necessity for law enforcement agencies to adapt, integrating cyber forensics and community collaboration to effectively respond to modern crimes that blur the lines between virtual and physical worlds. In retrospect, Ethan's arrest marked a turning point in a tragic narrative, a moment when fear gave way to hope that justice could be served and further harm prevented. Yet it also served as a sobering reminder of the societal failures that allowed a young individual to spiral into violence. The comprehensive investigation, fueled by technological advancements and community cooperation, illuminated paths forward for preventing similar tragedy. It called for enhanced vigilance, early identification of warning signs, and holistic approaches that addressed the roots of hatred and violence among youth. Ethan's capture was not merely the end of a manhunt, but the beginning of a broader conversation about responsibility, prevention, and healing. The case exposed the fragility of communities in the face of internal threats and highlighted the importance of fostering environments where young people are supported, understood, and guided away from destructive ideologies. It is a story that challenges us all to confront uncomfortable realities and to commit to building safer, more inclusive societies where such darkness cannot take hold. The community was left reeling from the brutal revelations that had come to light. The peaceful streets, once places where neighbors exchanged greetings and children played freely, were now shadowed by fear and grief. The families of the women who had been attacked bore the heaviest burden, their lives forever altered by the senseless violence inflicted upon their loved ones. Their pain was raw and palpable, a constant reminder of the tragic events that had shattered their sense of safety and trust. These families united in their call for justice, demanding not only that Ethan be held accountable, but that the punishment reflect the gravity of the crimes committed. Their voices echoed through the halls of local government and courts, refusing to be silenced by time or sorrow. The shockwaves of the case spread far beyond the immediate circle of victims' families. Community members who had once lived in relative ignorance of such dangers found themselves confronting harsh realities. The trust that underpinned daily life was fractured, replaced by a cautious vigilance that permeated neighborhoods and public spaces. This collective trauma galvanized many to speak out, to demand answers, and to push for meaningful change. The incident forced a reckoning with uncomfortable truths about the persistent presence of racism and violence within society, issues often hidden beneath the surface but no less devastating. Activists and human rights defenders, including Angela Johnson and Marcus Taylor, seized upon the tragedy as a catalyst for broader awareness and action. They highlighted the specific vulnerabilities faced by Black women in the United States who disproportionately suffer from targeted violence and systemic neglect. The case illuminated the intersectionality of race and gender-based violence, revealing how societal structures often fail to protect those most at risk. Advocacy groups amplified the voices of survivors and families, bringing national attention to the pervasive problem of racialized violence and the urgent need for comprehensive interventions. In media outlets and across social media platforms, discussions proliferated about the systemic failures that had allowed such violence to occur unchecked. Commentators and experts debated the root causes, pointing to deeply ingrained racial prejudices, gaps in law enforcement responsiveness, and the insufficiency of social support systems. The dialogue extended beyond individual culpability to examine the cultural and institutional factors that perpetuate cycles of violence and discrimination. Stories of other victims, often overlooked or marginalized, were shared widely, underscoring the pattern of neglect faced by vulnerable communities. Many voices called emphatically for reforms across multiple sectors. Educational programs aimed at combating racism were identified as critical tools in shaping more inclusive and empathetic future generations. There was a push for curricula that address racial bias and teach respect and equality from an early age. Simultaneously, advocates stressed the importance of expanding and strengthening support services for victims of violence, ensuring accessible counseling, legal aid, and protective measures tailored to the unique needs of marginalized groups. The demand was for systemic change that not only responds to violence after the fact, but actively prevents it through cultural transformation and community empowerment. The tragedy became emblematic, a symbol of the urgent necessity for change at every level of society. It served as a stark reminder that violence rooted in racism is not isolated, but woven into the fabric of social structures. The case illuminated how deeply prejudice can impact lives, communities, and the very notion of justice. It forced individuals and institutions alike to confront their roles in perpetuating inequality and to commit to meaningful action. Community gatherings, vigils, and forums became spaces where grief, outrage, and hope intertwined. These events provided platforms for dialogue, healing, and mobilization, bringing together diverse voices united by a common purpose. Through collective mourning, the community sought to reclaim its sense of solidarity and to chart a path forward grounded in justice and compassion. The ongoing conversations inspired legislative proposals aimed at improving protections for marginalized populations and enhancing the responsiveness of criminal justice systems. Policymakers faced mounting pressure to enact measures that address both the symptoms and the underlying causes of racial violence. The advocacy extended to law enforcement training, emphasizing cultural competency and trauma-informed approaches, with the goal of rebuilding trust between authorities and the communities they serve. In the aftermath, the case also highlighted the critical role of intersectional perspectives in understanding and addressing social issues, recognizing how race, gender, socioeconomic status, and other factors converge to shape experiences of violence and discrimination was seen as essential in crafting effective solutions. This nuanced understanding challenged simplistic narratives and encouraged more comprehensive, inclusive policies and practices. Ultimately, the community's response to the tragedy was a testament to resilience and the enduring human spirit. Despite the pain and fear, people came together to demand justice, advocate for change, and envision a future free from hatred and violence. The legacy of those lost and those affected fueled a movement dedicated to dismantling systemic racism and building safer, more equitable communities. This case became more than a headline. It became a call to conscience. It challenged everyone to look beyond individual acts of violence and to recognize the broader social forces at play. The hope was that, through awareness, education, and collective action, the cycle of violence could be broken, and that no more lives would be destroyed by the scourge of hatred. The story of Ethan Williams and his victims serves as a stark and brutal reminder of the destructive power hatred wields when left unchecked and allowed to fester beneath the surface of society. It reveals how prejudice, when deeply rooted and unchallenged, can grow into a force capable of tearing apart lives, families, and communities. This narrative is not merely about isolated acts of violence. It reflects broader societal failures to confront and address the seeds of racism and intolerance that persist in many corners of the world. The pain endured by the victims and the tragic trajectory of Ethan's life underscore the urgent need for collective vigilance and responsibility in combating hatred at its origin. This tale calls on every individual, every community, and every institution to refuse complacency in the face of racism and violence. It warns against turning a blind eye or dismissing such problems as distant or irrelevant. Instead, it implores society to recognize that these issues are pervasive, intertwined with historical, cultural, and systemic factors that demand proactive and sustained intervention. The consequences of ignoring the signs are painfully evident in the lives shattered by acts of hate-fueled aggression. To protect the most vulnerable among us, those who often bear the brunt of discrimination and violence, we must come together in solidarity and purpose. Creating environments where individuals of all races, ages, and backgrounds feel safe and supported is paramount. This responsibility falls on families, educators, community leaders, policymakers, and social institutions alike. Children must grow up in spaces free from the fear of prejudice and hate, where diversity is not only accepted, but celebrated as a source of strength and richness. Adults must also be assured that their identities will be respected, their rights upheld, and their well-being safeguarded. Only by fostering inclusive communities can we begin to heal the divisions that have long fractured societies and opened the door to hatred. Awareness is the first critical step in this ongoing struggle. Understanding the historical roots of racism, the subtle ways prejudice manifests, and the impact it has on individuals and groups is essential. Education must go beyond mere acknowledgement. It must actively challenge stereotypes, dismantle biases, and cultivate empathy. Schools, workplaces, and public forums must prioritize curricula and conversations that illuminate the shared humanity that binds us all, bridging gaps created by fear and ignorance. Through education, we empower individuals to question harmful narratives and to stand against injustice. But awareness alone is insufficient. It must be accompanied by active, sustained action. This includes advocating for policies that promote equity and protect marginalized communities, supporting mental health services tailored to those affected by trauma related to discrimination and violence, and fostering opportunities for dialogue and reconciliation. Grassroots movements and community organizations play a vital role in this work, mobilizing individuals to participate in change and holding institutions accountable. Action means intervening before hatred escalates into violence, providing support to those targeted, and creating networks of care that prevent isolation. Preventing future tragedies requires a holistic approach that addresses both immediate dangers and the underlying social conditions that give rise to hatred. This means investing in early intervention programs for at-risk youth, promoting cultural competency in law enforcement and social services, and ensuring equitable access to education, employment, and healthcare. By tackling systemic inequities and fostering social cohesion, society can diminish the fertile ground on which racist ideologies thrive. Building a world founded on respect and justice is not an abstract ideal, but a tangible goal attainable through collective commitment. It demands courage to confront uncomfortable truths, willingness to listen to marginalized voices, and determination to enact meaningful change. Each individual's actions contribute to this larger movement, from everyday kindness and advocacy to policy reform and community engagement. The story of Ethan Williams and his victims serves as a catalyst, inspiring reflection and motivating efforts to create safer, more just societies where all can flourish without fear. In the end, this narrative is a call to humanity to rise above division and hatred, to nurture compassion, and to uphold the dignity of every person. It reminds us that the battle against racism and violence is ongoing and requires persistent dedication. Through awareness, education, and action, we can honor the memory of those lost, support those affected, and work toward a future free from the shadows of prejudice and cruelty. The path is challenging, but the promise of a world grounded in equity and respect makes the journey not only necessary but profoundly worthwhile.